Good evening. My name is Edward Sanchin Oberholzer. I'm the resident priest and guiding teacher here at the Joseph Priestley Zen Sangha in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. We're an affiliate of Empty Moon Zen. There are all kinds of ways of viewing the human body as magical. As a small child, I thought of our insides as largely undifferentiated, just a mass of something like red jello. Perhaps not magical, but certainly odd. It was years later that I came to understand that there were organs that had their own integrity, that could be held in the hand, pointed to. That's a kidney. That's a liver. My wife grew up on a farm and, I'm sure, didn't have that particular delusion. One of the myths that, frankly, I'm still trying to overcome is the unshakable notion that there are on and off switches in my body, spots that I could press to unkink muscles, to release tendons. I've never been able to bend over and touch my toes. Surely there's some spot I could push, perhaps in my lower back, somewhere that will release those tightened muscles, lengthen those muscle fibers, and allow me to finally bend over and touch my toes, if not the floor itself. I think of much of this as akin to a kind of pre-adolescent view of science. And I often think of that when I contemplate chiropractors. That adolescent view of science was the sort of thing that allowed me as a second grader to take a nail, punch a hole in a D-cell battery, insert a fuse of rolled paper rubbed with the gunpowder we got from firecrackers, light the fuse, run away, and then wonder why the battery hadn't exploded. Aren't batteries little bundles of energy? Isn't that what's released in an explosion? Why not? And wherever were my parents while I was doing this? Life is far more prosaic than a second grader would wish, but I still fall prey to that desire for a quick fix, that belief that if I just twist my neck just so, something magical will happen, things will fall into place. Following up on that line of thought, I recently picked up a copy of a book by a contemporary Rinzai teacher on the promise that it would show me breathing techniques that would lead to Satori. Maybe I haven't gotten them right. The Buddha cautioned us to just breathe. If your breath is short, breathe short breaths. If your breath is long, breathe long breaths. Don't force the breath. Take it as it comes, ragged, smooth, deep and slow, shallow and rapid. Now, my teacher has spoken of how he is taken in his old age to extending the out-breath as he sits. I just never think in time to do that, and when it occurs to me, I fall back on the classic line of the Buddha to just breathe with the breath you have, to not try to regulate your breathing. If my hold on a childish vision of the magic of the human body has been disenchanted, there is still magic in the breath, as here in the opening of Allen Ginsberg's Mind Breaths. Thus, cross-legged on round pillow, sat in Teton space, I breathed upon the aluminum microphone stand, a body's length away. I breathed upon the teacher's throne, the wooden chair with yellow pillow. I breathed further, past the sake cup, half emptied by the breathing guru. Breathed upon the green-sprigged, thick-leaved plant in a flower pot. Breathed upon the vast plate glass shining back, the assembled sitting sangha in the meditation cafeteria. My breath through nostril floated out to the moth of the evening beating into windowed illumination. Breathed outward over aspen twigs trembling. September's top yellow. Leaves, twilight at mountain foot. But that long out-breath takes me back to Labor Day weekend nearly 30 years ago. My father was lying in a hospital bed in southern New Jersey in the end stages of what had been a long decline that, in honesty, began when he took up smoking at the age of 14. Dad had been in hospice for about 3 months by Labor Day, his emphysema having finally taken the turn from chronic to acute. I was about to drive down from Boston to give my mother some respite when she called to say not to bother, that she'd call the ambulance to take him into the hospital when his lack of oxygen had led him to turn as violent as his weakened state would allow. When I arrived Sunday night, he was unconscious, breathing raggedly. My mother and I spent that evening in the hospital room and returned the next day early in the morning of Labor Day. It did seem appropriate, not because my father was a supporter of unions. He wasn't. But because it became increasingly obvious that for some of us, death is hard work. My mother, a far more social person than I ever will be, spent her time talking with the nurses who would come in periodically to check on how things were going. I watched him breathe. There would be a long, excruciatingly long out-breath, followed by nothing. Each time it happened, I was convinced that I'd just witnessed his final breath, but then, after what seemed like minutes, but could only really have been seconds, a gasping in-breath, sudden, almost violent, and the cycle began again with that slow, almost imperceptible exhalation. If prolonging the out-breath leads to satori, my father had it down, and the gift he gave me in that moment was the very real, the very visceral awareness of breath itself. Not mine, granted, but his, though where in that dimmed hospital room was there any gap? And when that final breath came, that death rattle that seemed as though there was no longer any control, conscious or otherwise, over the outflowing of the breath, I was left with that final gift, the consciousness of the breath, the following of inhalation and exhalation, the gift of just being present in that one moment. I do find myself on the out-breath simply forgetting to breathe back in. I know that's an illusion, part of my lingering childish beliefs in how the body works. At a certain point, the CO2 levels in the blood trigger an involuntary inhalation, and I never quite get to that point, although it feels as though ages have passed. The breath goes out, my father's last breath, an exhalation I picked up in turn in that dimly lit hospital room, a breath circling around, and as Ginsberg concludes his poem, a breath returns vast gliding grass flats, cow-dotted into Jackson Hole, into a corner of the plains, ups the asphalt road and mud parking lot, a breeze of restless September, up wood stairways in the wind into the cafeteria at Teton Village, under the red tram lift, a calm breath, a silent breath, a slow breath breathes outward from the nostrils. Thank you.